Think about the Declaration of Independence for a second. What pops into your head first? I bet it's John Hancock's massive, sweeping signature right in the middle of the page. It's so iconic, his actual name literally became slang for a signature. But today, in this explainer, we're going to dig beneath that famous ink. We're looking at an enduring mystery, and honestly, a super fascinating look at how we as humans remember our own past.
Right? So we've all heard the legendary quote. It paints this totally vivid cinematic picture. Hancock grabs his quill, boldly signs his name with this massive flourish, and loudly taunts King George III, saying he wrote it large so the king could read it without spectacles. It's pure theatrical defiance. We absolutely love this story. We teach it to our kids. It just feels perfectly aligned with that rebellious American Revolution spirit.
But here's where things get interesting. We have to ask ourselves, did that actually happen? Or is this dramatic scene just a coping mechanism, a way for us to process a massive forest of complex ideas? As we shift from this famous myth to the deeper psychology behind it, we really need to look at why we tell stories the way we do.
Part 1. Papa's take on storytelling, the philosophy of myth. To really get why the John Hancock myth exists, we need to introduce a mental model from the author we call Papa's take. You see, for millennia, long before writing was even a thing, humans passed down history around the campfire. So we have this deep evolutionary habit of constantly reshaping history to fit our cultural narratives.
Papa calls this the artifact of being human. It's basically our built-in tendency to simplify complex historical realities. Because, let's be honest, nuanced, in-depth backgrounds, they don't hold an audience's attention nearly as well as a theatrical tale about a hero defying a king. We just naturally ad-lib the historical record, adding in local customs and drama just to keep people captivated.
And this beautifully, or maybe frustratingly, illustrates how the historical record gets clouded. It is exactly like a giant game of historical telephone played over generations. We happily trade the dry, procedural realities of politics for the thrill of a good story. The hard facts slowly morph to fit the feelings of a people. We end up creating a narrative that speaks to our collective identity rather than the strict chronological data.
Part 2, uncovering the real timeline. The data meets the myth. Okay, it's time to put on our detective hats. We're going to shift into a skeptical, data-driven deconstruction of what actually went down in the summer of 1776. Let's strip away the campfire story and look at what the primary sources actually say about the birth of the United States.
When we actually break down the timeline, the picture completely changes. Congress didn't just sit down and sign this document all at once on the 4th of July. Actually, on July 4th, the text was simply adopted. That's it. It wasn't until July 19th that Congress ordered the document to be beautifully written out or engrossed on parchment. And the actual physical signing, that didn't officially begin until August 2nd. Now let's compare the theatrical myth directly with the quiet, documented reality. The myth tells us it was signed July 4th, mailed directly to the king, and that Hancock had this massive 500-pound bounty on his head. But the reality? It was signed August 2nd, kept safely tucked away in the archives of Congress, and historians have found literally zero contemporaneous evidence of any British bounty on Hancock in 1776. King George III definitely never issued one.
So, you're probably wondering, why is the signature so big then? Well, on August 2nd, John Hancock, acting as the president of the Second Continental Congress, was the very first person to sign that newly engrossed document. He was staring at a massive, completely blank piece of parchment. He wrote his name prominently right in the center simply because, well, he was first. He had absolutely no idea how the other 55 signatures were going to be arranged around his.
Plus, Congress never even intended to send that specific hand-signed parchment to King George anyway. The real message was broadcast to the world through what are called the Dunlap broadsides. These were about 200 printed copies dispatched across the colonies and all the way to Britain, and guess what? John Hancock's name was already printed at the bottom of those for the whole world to see. There was zero need for a giant handwritten signature to send a message to the king.
Part 3, treason over theatrical taunts. The true cost. Now, stripping away the myth of the theatrical taunt doesn't diminish John Hancock at all. Actually, it reveals a much deeper, quieter kind of bravery, one that required absolutely no manufactured drama.
Consider the immense real-world risk the man took. Hancock inherited a massive shipping fortune. He was very likely the wealthiest man in New England. He was a Harvard graduate, a highly influential merchant whose ship, the Liberty, had already been targeted and seized by British authorities. By calmly putting his pen to that paper, he was risking the total loss of his entire fortune and, literally, execution by hanging for treason.
So if Hancock didn't say the famous quote about the spectacles, where on earth did it come from? 1841. That is the year of the earliest known printing of the spectacles anecdote. It popped up in a Pennsylvania newspaper called the Adams Sentinel, tucked away in a little section called Revolutionary Anecdotes. Think about that. More than 60 years after the fact, completely unverified, and without a single primary source backing it up.
Part 4. The artifact of being human. Why we prefer the myth. So how do we connect these historical facts back to our everyday lives? Why are we so eager to cling to an 1841 newspaper clipping instead of the actual 1776 reality? Well, it brings us right back to Papa's guiding philosophy, the artifact of being human. We just naturally prefer vivid metaphors and simple stories over dry procedural history.
We really have to ask, is this tendency to simplify a flaw? Like, is it some kind of productivity paradox where our brains are just cutting corners to save energy? Or is it simply a natural coping mechanism for when we're faced with a rising tide of historical complexity? I mean, understanding the deep nuances of 18th century parliamentary law and congressional timelines is hard work. Picturing a bold rebel shouting at a king? That's easy.
Ultimately, the myth takes a procedural, highly dangerous, and very quiet political act and turns it into theatrical defiance. We trade the gravity of quiet courage for the thrill of bold theater, mostly because it stirs the national imagination. It gives the young nation a flashy superhero origin story rather than a slow-paced boardroom drama.
Part 5. The enduring truth. The value of deep research. As we bring all this together, we have to ask how we can actually find truth in a world that is just saturated with simplified, culturally ad-libbed narratives. Because the story of John Hancock's Signature, it isn't just about the American Revolution. It's a timeless lesson in media literacy and the real value of deep research.
Clarifying the historical record requires effort, and honestly, a healthy dose of skepticism. We have to be willing to question the accepted cultural narrative and actively seek out primary sources and hard data. When we embrace the nuance of reality instead of just settling for the simplified campfire story, we almost always find that the real, quiet courage of history is way more impressive than the myth.
I want to leave you with this final, resonant thought from Papa. What is enduring is when deep research reveals repeatedly and from different perspectives the truth. That requires effort. So the next time you hear a perfectly packaged, almost too good to be true historical anecdote, ask yourself, are you looking at the enduring truth or just another beautiful artifact of being human? Keep questioning, keep digging, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.